Emilio had been awake for 26 hours when it happened, and at that point his body had stopped asking for permission. He stepped out of the hospital doors into the cold Manhattan night, still in his navy scrubs, under a worn gray coat that had lost its shape 2 winters ago. Emilio Mendez, 31, senior nurse on the emergency floor, the kind of nurse doctors quietly relied on when things went wrong. He had just finished a double shift, 2 critical cases, 1 patient who didn't make it, and another who only did because Emilio refused to give up. His hands still smelled faintly like antiseptic, no matter how hard he had scrubbed. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't check it. He just needed to get home. There was a black SUV waiting near the curb. Engine low, back doors slightly open. The ride app had said the same thing. Black SUV, south entrance. Close enough. Emilio didn't question it. He opened the door, slipped inside, and the moment his body hit the leather seat, everything went quiet. The car smelled different. Not the usual artificial pine or something cheap trying to be clean. This was something warmer. Amber, cedar, something steady. It didn't register fully because his eyes had already closed. He leaned his head against the cool window and was gone within seconds. He didn't hear the other door open. Didn't feel the weight shift beside him. Didn't notice the driver hesitate and glance back. What woke him wasn't a sound. It was that feeling, the one people don't talk about but always understand. The sense that someone is looking at you, closely, deliberately. Emilio's eyes opened slowly, heavy, unfocused at first, then sharpening all at once. There was a man sitting beside him. Not just any man. Tall even while seated, broad shoulders under a dark tailored coat, posture relaxed but controlled. His name was Julian Hale, though Emilio didn't know that yet. 35, CEO of a private investment firm, a man used to rooms going quiet when he entered them. His expression right now wasn't annoyed or confused. It was something quieter, focused, like he had been watching for a while. Emilio straightened too fast, his neck cracking lightly, his pulse jumping. "This isn't my car," he said, voice low, rough from exhaustion. "No," Julian replied calmly. "It isn't." That was enough to send Emilio fully awake. He reached for the handle, face heating up as reality caught up with him. "I'm sorry. I thought the app said I just got off a double shift," and he cut himself off, shaking his head. "I'm really sorry." Julian didn't move. One arm rested along the back of the seat, the other on his knee. "It's fine." "It's not fine," Emilio said quickly, already pushing the door open. Cold air hit his face hard. "I'm leaving." He stepped out, almost tripping on the curb, closed the door too fast, and started walking. Then faster. Then he was halfway running down the block before he even realized it. His sneakers slapped against the wet pavement, his breath uneven, part exhaustion, part embarrassment. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. In his mind, that moment was already sealed off, something ridiculous that would fade by morning. Inside the car, Julian hadn't moved yet. The door had closed. The seat beside him was still slightly warm. The faint scent Emilio had brought with him lingered, clean, sharp, something like hospital soap mixed with something human and real. Julian reached down, almost absent-mindedly, and noticed a single dark strand of hair caught near the seam of the seat. He picked it up between his fingers, turning it once, thoughtful without knowing why. "Sir?" the driver asked carefully. Julian didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the empty space beside him, as if something had been left there that he couldn't quite name. Finally, he leaned back slightly. "Drive." 3 days later, Emilio had nearly convinced himself it didn't matter. He was back to work, moving through his routine, checking charts, adjusting 4 lines, correcting a junior nurse who mislabeled sample for the 3rd time that morning. The hospital was quieter on the 4th floor. Slower. Patients recovering instead of crashing. He preferred it. It gave him space to think, even if he tried not to. Room 412 had a new patient. Elderly, post-op, stable. Emilio pushed the door open with his shoulder, a stack of fresh linens in his arms. "Good morning. I'm Emilio. I'll be taking care of you today." The woman in the bed, Eleanor Hale, 68, elegant even in a hospital gown, smiled faintly. Emilio, she repeated, as if testing the name. That's a good one. I'm Eleanor. Don't call me Mrs. Hale unless you want me to correct you every 5 minutes. He allowed himself a small smile. Eleanor, then. He adjusted her pillow carefully, lifting her shoulder just enough to avoid strain, his movements practiced, efficient. Pain level, he asked gently. Manageable, she said, watching him. You're very good at this. I've had practice. She studied him a moment longer, something thoughtful in her expression, but before she could say more, the door opened again. Emilio didn't look up right away. I'll be with you in a second, he said, finishing the adjustment. Then he did look up, and everything paused. Julian stood in the doorway, coat over one arm, sleeves slightly rolled, like he hadn't slept much either. For half a second, the controlled composure on his face slipped. Recognition. Real, immediate. Emilio felt it hit him just as sharply. Eleanor spoke, unaware. Julian, come in. Don't hover. She gestured toward Emilio. This is Emilio. He's the reason I'm not throwing myself out the window. Julian stepped inside, slower than necessary. Emilio, he said, and this time the name sounded different. More deliberate. Nice to meet you. Emilio straightened, his professional instinct kicking in fast, like muscle memory. Mr. Hale, he replied, steady, controlled. Your mother's doing well. Julian nodded once, but his eyes stayed on Emilio a second too long. Not intrusive, not inappropriate, just present. Emilio broke the contact first, turning back to the foreline, checking something that didn't need checking. I'll come back in about an hour for medication, he said, already stepping toward the door. He almost made it out. Emilio. He stopped. Didn't fully turn. Yes. A pause, brief but noticeable. Good to see you again. There was nothing technically wrong with the sentence. It was normal, polite. But the way Julian said it, low, control, like it meant something else underneath, made Emilio's chest tighten in a way he didn't appreciate. Likewise, he answered just as neutral. He walked out without looking back. In the hallway, he exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing to even out. It didn't matter. This didn't matter. He had a job to do. Patients to check. Things that actually mattered. Inside the room, Eleanor watched her son closely. You know him, she said. Julian sat down beside her bed, his posture composed again, but his gaze drifted once toward the door Emilio had just walked through. We've met. Eleanor smiled slightly. How interesting. Julian didn't respond to that. He leaned back in the chair, but his mind was already somewhere else. Not in the room. Not in the hospital. Somewhere between a quiet car, a sleeping stranger, and a moment that should have meant nothing, but didn't. Because for the first time in a long while, Julian Hale wasn't thinking about control, or business, or outcomes. He was thinking about a man who had looked at him like he wasn't important at all, and he wasn't sure why that mattered. But it did. Julian did not come back to the hospital the next day out of obligation. That was the first thing he noticed about himself. He had already arranged everything for his mother's care, private room, top surgeon, no waiting lists, no compromises. Normally, that would have been enough. He would check in, make a few calls, ensure nothing slipped, then return to work. But this time, he came back early, before visiting hours properly began, and stayed longer than necessary without quite admitting why. Emilio noticed on the third morning. Emilio Mendez, still moving through his routine with the same steady rhythm, the same quiet authority. He checked vitals, adjusted Eleanor's pillows, spoke to her in a tone that was calm without being distant. He did not rush, but he did not linger either. He worked like someone who understood exactly how much time each moment deserved. Julian sat in the corner chair, laptop open, a call running quietly through his earpiece, but his attention kept drifting. Not to what Emilio was doing, but how. The small things. The way he warmed lotion in his hands before touching Eleanor's skin so she wouldn't flinch. The way he shifted his stance to block the harsh overhead light when she closed her eyes. The way he actually listened, when she spoke, even when what she said didn't matter medically. Julian had spent years around people who perform attention. This was different. This was precise. Learned. Real. It unsettled him more than he expected. By the end of that week, he had adjusted his schedule without saying it out loud. Meetings moved. Calls shortened. Time carved out in the mornings. He started bringing coffee. At first, it was just one cup, placed quietly at the nurse's station before Emilio arrived. No note. No explanation. Black because he remembered that from the one time he had seen Emilio drink it in the hallway, fast, without sugar, like it was fuel rather than comfort. Emilio noticed immediately. He picked up the cup, still warm, looked around once, then set it down without comment. He didn't ask. The next morning, there was another one. And the morning after that. By the fourth day, Emilio stopped pretending it was a coincidence. He still didn't say anything, but he drank it. That was enough for Julian to continue. Their conversations stayed careful. Always in the room, always with Eleanor present, always within the boundaries that kept everything clean. Julian would ask about his mother's recovery. Emilio would answer, clear and professional. Eleanor, for her part, watched both of them with growing amusement. She had spent decades reading rooms, reading people, understanding what was said and what wasn't. This, she recognized immediately. She just chose not to interrupt it. The first real shift happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The hallway was louder than usual, a patient 2 rooms down shouting, a nurse trying to calm him. Emilio stepped out without hesitation. Julian followed, not out of habit, but because something in the tone pulled him. The patient, a man in his 50s, agitated, disoriented, had already pushed one of the staff back. His foreline hung loose, blood spotting the floor. "Sir, I need you to stay still," Emilio said, voice firm but even, stepping closer slowly. The man swung his arm, not fully in control, but strong enough to be dangerous. Emilio didn't step back. He adjusted his angle instead, catching the man's wrist, not aggressively, just enough to redirect the movement. "Look at me," he said quieter now. "You're not in danger. You're safe." It didn't work immediately. It rarely did. The man struggled, breath uneven, panic driving him. Emilio stayed exactly where he was, grounded, steady, repeating the same words, adjusting his grip, never escalating. It took nearly a full minute before the man's movement slowed, then stopped. The hallway quieted with him. Julian stood a few feet away, watching everything, and for the first time, he understood something clearly. Emilio wasn't gentle because he was soft. He was controlled because he had to be. There was strength in it. Not loud, not obvious, but absolute. Emilio guided the patient back onto the bed, signaled for another nurse, then stepped away once it was handled. Only then did he notice Julian still there. "You shouldn't stand that close," Emilio said simply, brushing his hands off. "He could have hit you." Julian didn't respond immediately. "He didn't," he said instead. Emilio gave him a brief look, unreadable, then turned and walked back toward room 412. That night, Julian didn't think about work. He thought about that moment. The control. The restraint. The way Emilio had stepped forward when anyone else might have stepped back. It stayed with him longer than it should have. A few days later, Eleanor made a request that neither of them could ignore. "I want real food," she said, folding her hands like it was a formal demand. "Not this." Emilio glanced at the tray, unimpressed himself. "What kind of real food?" "Something that doesn't taste like regret," she replied. Julian exhaled softly, already reaching for his coat. "I'll get something." "You'll get the wrong thing," Eleanor said immediately. "He'll come with you." She pointed at Emilio without hesitation. Emilio opened his mouth to refuse, then closed it. It would take 15 minutes. 20 at most. He nodded once. "Fine." The air outside was heavy, humid, the kind that clung to skin immediately. They walked side by side, not too close, not too far, matching pace without discussing it. For a while, neither spoke. "You always work like that?" Julian asked eventually. Emilio glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like you're the only one responsible for what happens." Emilio let out a quiet breath. "That's because I usually am." There was no arrogance in it. Just fact. Julian accepted that. They reached a small place on the corner, ordered something simple, something Eleanor would actually eat. Julian paid without comment. Emilio didn't argue. He didn't thank him either. It wasn't about that. On the way back, the sky shifted without warning. Dark clouds rolled in fast, and within seconds, the first drops hit the pavement. Then more. Then everything at once. "Come on," Julian said, reaching for Emilio's wrist, not his hand, just enough to pull him toward the hospital entrance. The contact was brief, but it landed. Emilio didn't pull away immediately. They stopped under the overhang, both slightly out of breath, rain hitting hard just a few feet away. The noise filled the space between them. For a moment, neither moved. Emilio's hair was damp at the edges, his coat already catching the water. Julian's hand was still near his wrist, not holding anymore, just there. "You should let go," Emilio said quietly. Julian did, immediately, but he didn't step back. The distance stayed the same. Close. Too close, maybe. Emilio looked at him, really looked this time, not as a patient son, not as a stranger in a car. As a man. Julian held his gaze. Not pushing, not retreating, just present. The air shifted. Emilio felt it. He knew exactly what it was, and exactly why it was a problem. "This doesn't go anywhere," he said, voice low but steady. Julian didn't argue. "I know." A pause. Rain filling the silence. "You don't," Emilio said, softer now. "My job isn't something I can risk." Julian nodded once. "I understand." Emilio searched his face for a second, as if deciding whether that was true. Then something in him slipped, just slightly. Not fully, not completely. Just enough. The distance closed by a fraction. It wasn't planned. It wasn't discussed. Julian leaned in just enough to test it. Emilio didn't move away. That was all it took. The kiss was brief. Controlled. More question than answer. But it was real. Emilio pulled back first. Breath uneven. That shouldn't have happened. Julian didn't deny it. No, another pause. Then Emilio straightened, stepping back this time. "We go back inside," he said, "and this stays here." Julian looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded. All right. They walked back in without touching again. But something had already changed, and neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. 4 days after the rain, Julian felt something he didn't quite recognize at first. It wasn't excitement, not exactly. It was steadier than that, quieter, but it sat in his chest from the moment he woke up to the moment he fell asleep. He found himself replaying small things instead of big ones. The way Emilio had looked at him under the overhang. The way he had said this stays here like it mattered, like it was something fragile that could break if handled wrong. Julian didn't break it. Not intentionally. That was the problem. He went back to the hospital the next morning with the same measured composure he always carried, but something underneath it had shifted. He brought coffee again, placed it at the nurse's station, the same way, no note. Emilio picked it up without looking around this time. He didn't thank him. He didn't need to. That had become their language. In room 412, everything stayed exactly as it should be. Emilio was efficient, focused, careful not to linger near Julian more than necessary. Julian respected that. He kept his distance, spoke when spoken to, watched less openly. If anything, he was trying not to push, not to overstep, not to turn that brief moment under the rain into something it wasn't allowed to be. But Julian Hale had spent his entire life solving problems. And somewhere in his mind, quietly, without him naming it, this had become one. He noticed things. The frayed cuff of Emilio's coat when he took it off at the start of shift. The way Emilio rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired, like the muscle there never fully relaxed. The way he skipped meals. The way he drank coffee too fast and too hot because he didn't have time to let it cool. None of those were dramatic problems. None of them were things Emilio complained about. But Julian noticed, and noticing led to instinct. And instinct for Julian had always meant action. He told himself it was harmless, that it wasn't interfering, that it was just making things easier. The call took less than 5 minutes. He sat in the back of his car between meetings, dialed the director of the hospital, a man named Henry Clark, someone he knew from aboard years ago. The conversation was smooth, almost casual. He spoke about his mother's care, about how impressed he was, about how rare it was to find someone like Emilio. Then Gently, he added a request. Not a demand. Not even framed as important. Just a preference. If possible, he would appreciate Emilio being kept primarily on his mother's case. Stability. Continuity. Better recovery outcomes. Henry agreed immediately. Of course he did. Julian ended the call feeling satisfied. Like he had done something right. Something useful. Something that aligned the situation better. He didn't think about Emilio when he made the call. Not really. He thought about the result. That afternoon, a box was delivered to Emilio's apartment. Julian hadn't planned that one for long either. He saw the code in a window. Simple, well-cut, warm without being excessive. He pictured Emilio waiting for a bus in winter, wind cutting through thin fabric, and it felt like a problem with an obvious solution. He didn't include a note. He didn't ask. It didn't occur to him that he should. Emilio knew the moment he saw the box. It was sitting just inside his door when he got home, clean, precise, expensive in a way that didn't need a label. He stood there for a full minute before touching it. He already understood what it was. Not just the object, but the intention behind it. He opened it slowly anyway. The code inside was perfect. The kind of perfect that came from someone observing carefully. Size, cut, color. It would fit him exactly. That made it worse. He didn't get angry right away. That came later. First, there was something else. Something colder. Recognition. Julian had seen him, but not in the way Emilio needed to be seen. The next morning, Emilio returned the box. No confrontation. No scene. Just a note, folded once, placed inside. Julian didn't see it until that evening. He walked into his apartment, noticed the box immediately on the entry table, something in his chest tightening before he even touched it. He opened it, found the code exactly as he had sent it, untouched, and the note resting against the fabric. He read it once. Then again. I don't need you to take care of me. I need you to see me. Please don't send anything else. That was all. Julian sat down slowly, the note still in his hand, and for the first time, something didn't make sense in a way he couldn't fix. He had seen Emilio, hadn't he? He had noticed everything. The small details. The things others missed. That was what he did. That was how he understood the world. But the note didn't read like gratitude. It read like a boundary, and he realized, too late, that he didn't know where that boundary had been. The call from the hospital came the next morning. He didn't expect it to matter. He thought it would be routine. A follow-up, maybe. It wasn't. By the time he reached the 4th floor, something had already shifted. The atmosphere was different. Subtle, but unmistakable. Conversations quieter. Glances that lingered half a second too long before looking away. Julian walked past the nurse's station, his gaze already searching for Emilio, but he didn't see him. Instead, he saw him 10 minutes later, stepping out of the elevator from the administrative floor. Emilio looked composed. Too composed. The kind of control that only showed up when something had already gone wrong. Emilio, Julian said, moving toward him. Emilio lifted a hand, stopping him before he got too close. Don't. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Julian stopped. What happened? He asked, quieter now. Emilio looked at him then, directly, and Julian felt something shift in his chest again, sharper this time. I got reassigned, Emilio said. Effective immediately. Off this floor. Julian frowned. Why? Emilio let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. You really don't know? Something in Julian's silence answered that. Emilio nodded once, slow, controlled. Of course you don't. I can fix it, Julian said quickly. The words came out before he could stop them. I'll talk to. That's the problem. Emilio cut in. Julian stopped. You think everything is something you can fix, Emilio continued, his voice still level, but tighter now. You think if you push the right way, call the right person, it all just adjusts. Julian felt the truth of that land, even before Emilio said the rest. I had a job, Emilio said. I had a place here. And now I have a note in my file because someone decided I was getting special treatment. Julian's chest tightened. I didn't. You did, Emilio said. Not harsh, not loud, just certain. The hallway around them kept moving. Nurses passing. A cart rolling by. Life continuing like nothing was breaking in the middle of it. Julian stepped closer, slower this time. I was trying to help. Emilio shook his head. You weren't trying to help me. You were trying to make things easier for yourself. That landed harder. Julian didn't have an answer for it. I didn't ask for any of it, Emilio added. Not the call. Not the coat. Not any of this. Silence stretched between them. I need to go say goodbye to your mother, Emilio said finally. After that, I'm done here. Julian's instinct rose again, immediate, sharp. Let me fix this first. Don't, Emilio said again, softer now, but no less firm. Please, just don't. There was something in that word, in the way he said it, that made Julian stop for real this time. Emilio walked past him. Julian didn't follow. For the first time in a long time, he stood there and did nothing. And it felt worse than anything he could have done wrong. For the first time in his adult life, Julian didn't make a call. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't try to rearrange the outcome, didn't look for the fastest way to undo what had already been done. He stood in that hallway long after Emilio walked away, feeling something unfamiliar settle into him. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even guilt in the way he understood guilt. It was quieter, heavier, like something had shifted out of place and refused to move back no matter how hard he pushed. That night, he went home, took off his coat, sat down in the chair by the window, and read Emilio's note again. Then he turned it over, like there might be more written on the back. There wasn't. I need you to see me. He had thought he did. That was the part that stayed with him. He had seen details, patterns, needs, but not the person in front of him, not in the way Emilio meant. He had turned care into a solution, into something he could provide, something he could control. And he had done it so smoothly, so naturally, that he hadn't even noticed the damage until it was already done. The next morning, Julian didn't go to the hospital right away. He didn't trust himself to walk into that building and pretend nothing had changed. He sat at his desk, meetings lined up in front of him, numbers on screens, people talking, decisions waiting, and for the first time in years, he couldn't focus on any of it. His mind kept circling back to one moment. Emilio, standing in front of him, composed, controlled, saying, "You were trying to make things easier for yourself." Julian had never thought of it that way. But once he heard it, he couldn't unhear it. He went to the hospital later that afternoon, quieter than usual, less certain of his place in it. Eleanor was awake, sitting up with a book she wasn't reading. She looked at him once, long enough to understand everything without asking. "You did something," she said, not accusing, just stating it. Julian didn't lie. "I thought I was helping." Eleanor nodded slowly, closing the book in her lap. "You usually do. That's the problem." He sat down beside her, hands loosely clasped, not sure where to begin. "He's gone," he said. "Yes, I can fix it." Eleanor looked at him, then really looked, and something in her expression softened, but not in the way he wanted. "No, darling," she said gently. "You can't. Not this one." Julian let out a slow breath, leaning back in the chair. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "For once," she replied, almost kindly, "nothing." That answer didn't sit well. It wasn't actionable. It didn't give him direction. But it was the only one he had. So he did the one thing he hadn't done before. He waited. The first letter took him longer than expected. He sat at his desk with a blank sheet of paper in front of him, pen in hand, realizing how rarely he had to put something into words without negotiating it, without framing it, without shaping it for an outcome. The first version sounded like an explanation. The second sounded like an excuse. He tore both of them up. The third was shorter, honest in a way that felt unfamiliar. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't promise anything. He just wrote what he finally understood. Then he mailed it, not even sure it would reach Emilio. Emilio did receive it. At his new hospital, across the city, a place that didn't know Julian Hale's name, didn't care about it, didn't change its rhythm for anyone. Emilio stood in the staff room, envelope in his hand, recognizing the handwriting immediately. He didn't open it right away. He finished his shift first. He moved through his work the way he always did, steady, focused, present. Only when he got home did he sit down, open the envelope, and read. He read it twice. Then he folded it back up and placed it in the top drawer of his nightstand. He didn't throw it away. He didn't respond either. The second letter came a week later. Then another. Emilio read each one. Always alone. Always carefully. Julian didn't repeat himself. He didn't defend what he had done. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He wrote about what he was learning, about what he was trying to understand without expecting Emilio to validate it. That was new. Emilio noticed that. Life moved on around it. Emilio settled into his new hospital. It was busier, rougher, less polished, but it was real. The patients were harder. The resources thinner. The expectations clearer. He worked longer shifts, but he felt steadier. Like he was rebuilding something from the ground up without anyone interfering. He made friends there, people who didn't know anything about his past, who didn't look at him differently. It mattered more than he expected. Months passed. Eleanor's health declined slowly, then faster. Her letters to Emilio came less often, shorter each time, but still precise, still warm. When the last one arrived, it only said, "Take care of yourself. And don't stop being exactly who you are." Emilio read it 3 times before setting it aside. She passed away in early autumn. Emilio didn't plan to go to the funeral. He told himself it would complicate things, that it wasn't his place anymore. But the morning of, he found himself getting dressed anyway, standing in front of the mirror longer than necessary, adjusting a black shirt that didn't quite fit the way he wanted. He went. The service was quiet, respectful, filled with people who spoke about Eleanor as if she had been a force they all orbited. Emilio stood in the back, hands in his pockets, not drawing attention. He saw Julian immediately. He looked different. Not dramatically, but enough. Less rigid. Less certain. Thinner, maybe. Tired in a way that wasn't just physical. Julian didn't see him during the service. Not once. Emilio stayed until the end, until people began to move, to leave, to gather in small groups. Then he turned and walked out before anything could happen. He made it to the sidewalk before he stopped. Something made him turn back. Julian was standing in the doorway of the church, looking directly at him. Not surprised. Not startled. Like he had known, somehow, that Emilio would be there. They didn't speak. Not across that distance. Julian just nodded once. Small. Respectful. Emilio nodded back. Then he turned and walked away. That could have been the end. It wasn't. 6 months later, on a quiet afternoon in early spring, Emilio sat alone on a bench in Bryant Park, a cup of coffee in his hand, the city moving around him without asking anything. He had a rare hour to himself. No shift, no responsibilities pressing in. He was thinking about nothing in particular, which in itself felt new. He felt it before he saw him. The shift in the space beside him, the subtle awareness of someone familiar. Julian sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving a clear space between them. "Can I sit here?" he asked, even though he already had. Emilio let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he nodded once. "You already are." Julian almost smiled. It didn't fully reach his face, but it was closer than before. They sat like that for a while, not speaking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't easy either. It was something in between. "I've been writing," Julian said eventually. "I know," Emilio replied. "I read them." Julian went still for a second. "All of them?" "Yes." Another pause. "I didn't throw them away." Julian let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Okay." Emilio looked at him, then properly. "I'm not saying that to be kind," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true. I understand." More silence. Softer this time. "I missed you," Emilio said, the words steady, without hesitation. For a while. Julian didn't rush to respond. "I know," he said quietly. "I missed you too." That wasn't the important part. The important part was what came next. Julian didn't move closer, didn't reach for him, didn't try to close the distance that still existed between them. Instead, he placed his hand on the bench, palm up, halfway between them. Not touching. Just there. Emilio looked at it. Then at him. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved his hand and placed it on top of Julian's. Julian closed his fingers gently, careful, like he understood Now, exactly how much pressure something could take before it broke. "Come here," he said, softer than before. Emilio did. Not all the way. Just enough. Julian's other hand came up, resting lightly against Emilio's cheek, giving him time to pull back if he wanted to. He didn't. Julian leaned in, pressing a slow, careful kiss to his forehead first. Not rushed. Not claimed. Then, only after a pause, he kissed him properly. It wasn't like before. No urgency. No mistake. Just two people choosing it, fully aware of what it meant. When they pulled back, Emilio let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "We're not telling anyone how this started." Julian nodded. Agreed. They didn't move apart right away. For the first time, neither of them was trying to fix anything. They were just there, and that was enough. Some love stories aren't about finding the right person, but becoming someone worthy of them. If this touched you, thank you for listening. Your support keeps these stories alive.